Hello and welcome to the Project Doctor podcast. My name is Ralph Goossens and I'm your project management expert, presenting you with all the things you need to know about project management. Project Doctor is here to provide you with expert analysis and with recipes that you can put to practical use immediately after the podcast, so stay tuned. I'm very glad to hear that so many of you have already shown up. So let's get started right away. In this Project Doctor podcast, I talk about the project canvas. And this canvas is a map of the project landscape and it's divided into 12 tiles. I've described it extensively in the first episode. This is episode 8, and here I'm going to talk about planning. Now, have you ever felt that your planning could be improved? Or have you felt that your team did not understand the planning details very well? Or that you were given a planning that was unrealistic because nobody asked your input for that? Then keep listening. I have some advice for you. Also make sure to go to projectdoctor.online to download the extras that come with every episode of this podcast. What exactly is a planning? First and foremost, it is a tool that is used to coordinate the work in the project. And it connects several things. What to do, so that's related to the deliverables. Who does it, that's related to the team. By when should it be done, related to the timing. And how do they depend on each other in terms of sequence. So one after the other, start at the same time, end at the same time, or no dependence at all. And by answering these questions, the planning is the tool that stitches all these aspects together. A planning is also a social construction, which means you have to create it as a project manager, and the people around you, your team, your stakeholders, have to actually believe it. You, as a project manager, declare that something now is the planning. And then the team, by accepting that, turns it into a commitment, something that can be acted upon. Very interesting to think about how this actually works. Because you have been given the role of project manager, you have also been granted the power to create realities. And declaring a planning is one of the most powerful things you can do. Picture this. I'm at a desk in a hotel room in Finland, fiddling away at my MS project file that is the final draft of the planning for the project that I'm about to run. This desk in my hotel room, of course, is too small to work comfortably. There's not enough room to put down both my bottle of beer and the mouse. I'm moving around tasks and resources on the screen. I'm changing dates. I'm adding and removing dependencies between tasks. It's way past midnight when I'm happy enough with the results. This is the initial planning that I'll be presenting tomorrow morning. When I'm saving this version of the file, it's just that, a file that sits on my computer. Then picture the next thing. It's the following morning, and I'm standing at the front of a large room in that same hotel in Finland. And it's filled with people who are crucial to my project. There's designers, developers, logistics consultants, end users, managers, and a few people from supplier companies who will also be involved. I'm presenting and showing this MS project file. I'm explaining the approach, telling about the various phases and milestones, talking about the roles that everybody will have to fulfill in this project, and trying to motivate them to cooperate and to contribute to the end result. Then there are questions. I try to answer them as best as I can. And then toward the end of that meeting, it's a miracle that's happening. This simple file on my computer has transformed magically into a shared commitment from tens of people to give their best energies, to accept frustration and setbacks and still continue, to accept my decisions to unblock issues, to even work late nights and weekends in order to achieve the deadlines. That simple draft file is now a real project plan. It has become the heartbeat of the project. As you can imagine, there are many reasons why I love my job as a project manager, but it is these moments of power when I can magically turn a draft file into a real project plan that I love the most. When I talked about the project canvas in episode 1, the planning tile is one of the 2 circles. The other ones are square. And it is connecting design, deliverables, and team/organization. And this connecting place visualizes the central role of planning in the hard skills part of project management competencies. Planning is all about coordination. There is a second circle-shaped tile of the project canvas. It's called expectations, and that one connects the end users, the sponsors, and the third parties. This tile is all about communication. And these 2 circle-shaped tiles show the importance of the 2 key competencies for project managers: to coordinate and to communicate. I've talked about end users in episode 4, about the sponsor in episode 7 of this series. And obviously, the expectation style will follow in a future episode. Now that I've talked about what a planning actually is, I'm going to tell a bit more about how to create it, the key ingredients of a planning. And I'll highlight 6 key elements: the product breakdown structure, the work breakdown structure, the network, the Gantt chart, phases, milestones, critical path, and baseline. Of course, whole libraries have been written about planning, and what I'm highlighting here is just my personal view of what is the most important, without claiming, of course, that it's the end-all and be-all of planning knowledge. Let's start with the PBS, product breakdown structure. It's a hierarchical description of everything that the project has to deliver. As a quick example, in quite a few projects that I've been running, integrations were a core deliverable, interfaces between systems. And that product and interface would break down first into 3 components: an incoming adapter, a transformation module, and an outgoing adapter. Then the incoming adapter might break down again into a queuing module, a processing module, an archiving function, a file format converter, etc., etc. I guess you get the picture. Next thing is the WBS, or work breakdown structure. Again, you can picture this as a hierarchical description of the work, the tasks that need to be done. The way to create it basically is to check the PBS and decide which tasks are needed to create all of the elements of the product breakdown. Some may have to be developed from scratch, some might be bought, some may be libraries that just need to be installed, some might be framework components or modules that need to be adapted, etc. An important consideration is that you will need to understand the technology at hand to arrive at a good work breakdown structure. In my opinion, this means that you should involve the development team in setting up the work breakdown structure, WBS, part of your planning. There's usually some logical way to group the tasks from the WBS into certain types that suggest the phases that you can put into the planning, like for a software project: analysis, design, build, test, deploy, go live. Next step is the network. When you have the work breakdown structure, you must decide the dependencies, what needs to be done first before a next step can be taken, what could be done in parallel, which tasks might depend on third parties to do their stuff first, etc. Again, if you are not deep into the technology that the project is using, you must involve the development team / technical consultants here. I will talk more about how to do that a bit later in this episode. For now, just remember the word planning poker. Next is the Gantt chart. When you have all the bits and pieces of the work breakdown structure and have put them into a network, Then it's time to assign resources and put effort estimations to each task. That will give you a timeline overview of the project. That's the Gantt chart. If you have been thinking about phases, you can visualize them in the Gantt chart, and dates that are important to stakeholders can be highlighted as milestones. Now, I mentioned the word resources, and I'll be talking about resources in another episode in more detail. But right here, it's already important to say that the planning decides the budget to a large part. The effort estimations that go into the planning obviously relate to hours that people need to work to create stuff. And these hours again relate to what the sponsor has to pay. Your planning, therefore, is also a tool to predict what costs will be expended by when. Another concept related to the Gantt chart is the critical path. It's something that can be calculated from the Gantt chart. A critical path is that sequence of tasks from the start to the finish that take the greatest amount of time to cross through the whole timeline of your project. Now you may wonder, why is this important? Because any delay on the critical path means that you cannot achieve the planned end date anymore. So you will have to watch all the tasks on the critical path very, very carefully. And then the final concept is the word baseline. That's basically just the very first version of the planning that gets officially approved by the steering committee or by the sponsor. Think back for a second of what I had at the end of that meeting in the large hall in that hotel in Finland. An official planning, version 1. Many months later into the project, we had to decide that we needed to shift out the end date because of a delay on the critical path. I then created version 2 of the planning, which was presented to the steering committee and approved by them. And then I had to explain to all stakeholders the differences between the baseline and version 2 and what that meant for the commitments that everybody had made in the beginning in terms of what to do by when. So changing the baseline of a project is not a minor thing to do because it impacts everybody's commitment. Now that we've covered the ingredients of creating the planning, I'll talk a bit about the 4 phases or different ways of using the planning and the tools that you can use for that. Your first phase will be brainstorming about what needs to be in the planning. This is where you are thinking about the product breakdown structure and the work breakdown structure. I usually use a mind mapping tool such as SimpleMind for that. Next comes analysis and structuring of all those ingredients into an actual planning. Creating the network diagram, creating the Gantt chart, deciding on the phases and the milestones. This is where I often use Microsoft Project and sometimes Excel if the project is really, really simple. Another thing is that, of course, you'll have to present and explain the planning to the team and the stakeholders. Again, here I prefer MS Project because it has lots of options for visualizing and showing various aspects of the planning. For following up and reporting on progress against the planning, against the baseline, for instance, I often use Excel because that's generally the format that I get my input data from the finance department. And apart from tracking against the timeline, also the financial expenditure cost control is an important aspect here. There are, of course, many more tools like Primavera, but my personal experience happens to have been with MS Project. I find it a great tool, but with a steep learning curve, and especially that the default setting in MS Project for calculating the throughput time was definitely not obvious to me from the beginning. MS Project has a field which is called task type, which is a bit hidden under the advanced tab of the task settings, and that can be set to fixed effort, fixed duration, or fixed units. I definitely advise you to please read the manual on this topic and then read it again. And then play with some samples until you understand how these settings work. I am too much ashamed to tell you how many late night hours I have spent in that hotel room in Finland trying to get this right. One final topic I want to cover here is how to commit your team into the planning. I mentioned earlier already that for creating the work breakdown structure and the network diagram and the Gantt chart after that, you will need the input from the development team and or your technical consultants, from the people who really understand the technology that your project will be using. Nobody expects you as a project manager to have the in-depth knowledge and the hands-on experience that these people have. Otherwise, you would have been a developer or an architect or a consultant, right? But you are the project manager. So involving your team in creating the draft planning has two major benefits. Your team will have much more commitment to the planning because they contributed to it themselves. And second, your planning will be much more realistic if it is based on estimations from the people who actually are going to do the work. One very nice way to involve them is to play, here comes the word, planning poker. For each task from the work breakdown structure, the team member puts a card on the table with an estimated number of hours or days that they think it will take them to do this task. And obviously you can buy sets of cards for playing planning poker. If everyone puts the same estimation on the table, then that's the estimate that goes into the planning. There is consensus. For minor variations, you can just take the average. But the interesting stuff, if there are huge variations in how everybody estimates the same task, then your team members must talk with one another. Either someone is being very optimistic or very pessimistic, or someone has experience that the others do not yet have, or someone might have a tool or a trick that the others do not know about. So after the discussion and the exchange of knowledge and experience, a new round of cards is put on the table for that same task, and this continues until there is a consensus. This way of group planning, playing planning poker, is also a very good way to build the team spirit right from the start of the project. Okay, it's time to wrap it up now. Let's see what has been covered in this episode. First, I've talked about what planning actually is. It's a tool for coordination on the one hand, and a social construction on the other hand. I've talked about how to create the planning, working from the product breakdown, deciding the work breakdown, the network diagram, finally the Gantt chart with phases and milestones, and the critical path. And you can use MS Project and other tools to calculate the critical path for you. I've talked about tools to capture and present the planning and to maintain it. And finally, I've discussed planning poker as a way to engage your team for better planning. Please go to the website projectdoctor.online to download the extra materials with this episode and all the other episodes. Subscribe and follow it so that you won't have to miss an episode. And take some time, please, to leave your comments and reviews. I'm very happy to hear from you. Bye-bye.